All right, folks, welcome to the Smart Art Business Podcast. My name is Rachel Wilkins. I am delighted to be here today. This afternoon, I have the wonderful Dr. Chris Lee joining us. I'm going to actually hand the reins over to Chris today. I'm not even going to give him an introduction because Chris is going to do it himself. So, Chris, over to you.
That's famous last words. This is where the fire starts. My name is Dr. Chris. I specialize in teaching leaders how to regulate and rewire the brain using neuroscience. And yeah, it's an interesting story of how I actually got here, which we are welcome to dive into.
Well, let's start with a real crazy question. So our community is primarily artists that are looking to reach their ideal clients, impact them with their artwork, move them, and hopefully motivate them to make a purchase decision and take home a piece of their beautiful artwork and hopefully become lifelong collectors. So what the heck does neuroscience have to do with my community and the topic of worthiness?
Ooh, this is a loaded question. Such a loaded question, all the loaded questions. What does neuroscience have to do with this? So I think this is more a conversation of neuroscience and like selling. And, I had this huge aversion to selling. I never thought that I was going to run like an online community or like be teaching. I never thought the life I have now was the one that I would have. But at the end of the day, the real human experience is not the one that we're thinking about. It's the one that we're feeling about, right? And if we really start to pick apart the brain and understand how we develop experience, it's not about, oh my gosh, like look at how gorgeous that sunset is, or for your artists out there, look at how this piece of art moved you, or the music. It's about how it makes you feel. Right? It's impossible to describe the experience of a sunset, the warmth on your face, the emotion that you have, that first kiss with a lover. There's no way to describe those things. They're intangible, but they're things that connect us. And the human experience is that connection point. So when people are expressing art, I think it's about how well connected you are to yourself, how worthy you are. And the worthiness of yourself, for me, comes down to this level of self-acceptance. The good, the bad, the ugly, the shame, the Cherry Garcia in the bathtub at 2 a.m., all of that encompasses who you are. And for an artist, it's about, the bleeding heart and sharing and creating an experience for the viewer, for the listener. And the more that you're able to truly know yourself, the more that you're able to, in my world, kind of regulate through the trauma to better understand what got you to where you are today and who you are, you stand out in the crowd because only you can be you. Everybody else is taken.
We talk a lot about critics around here, about the external critics that exist, those that pass judgments online, in person, that make comments about our artists' work and don't necessarily understand the impact of how those comments and critiques can land, forgetting that there's often a human at the end of those insults. But we don't talk a lot around here, at least, about the internal critic. And that's really why I was very excited to have this conversation with you, because the rates of addiction, mental health problems, anxiety, depression are really high in our community, particularly. And I think that a lot of that comes down to some of these, not just the external critic, but also the internal. Can you speak on kind of your own experiences, some of the traumas that you've been through, and perhaps give us just a little introduction into this space?
Yeah, absolutely. Get your coffee, get your glass of wine, whatever you need, because this is quite a story. So like I had mentioned, the life that I have now is not the life that I originally thought I would have. Everything that has kind of come into fruition right now was like not even an idea. It wasn't even a part of my universe, I would say 6 years ago. So my life really got started. I started living, or I became alive, my first year into my doctorate program. So my first year into my doctorate program, just like every good 23-year-old, I had life figured out. Yeah, I was going to go to school, finish, run the 9-to-5 practice, the 2.5 kids, the 1.6 wives, like all of the things that the statistics tell me I should have in America, right? The white picket fence that's exactly 3.5 feet tall because, the HOA has their problems. And I'm a fond believer, and there's something bigger than ourselves as well. Whether you're empowered to call that God, the universe, Buddha, collective consciousness, unification, singularity, whatever that is for you, I empower you to use that language. For me, I'm going to call it the universe today. And I believe that the universe, and we are pieces of that universe, tends to instill us with specific gifts. And I imagine that your audience can probably connect to this. And most of the time, it's a gift that probably only you know is there at the start. You kind of feel it inside of you, and it's this urging. It's almost this longing, a craving for expression. And I started to feel that at an early age, and because that I was never taught to like lean into those urges or the expression of that, the environment wasn't really there. I must have missed that day in school, along with the day that taught me how to process my taxes. I was really kind of put into this container of following other people's expectations, which is what took me to school and to do all the things that I was doing. So about 6 years ago, I was about, let's just say for the sake of it, done with my neurophysiology midterm. This neurophysiology midterm was a lab practical. This lab practical, I am 95% sure was written in a language that nobody speaks. Like, I finished up this test and I was like, what is this? I was like distraught. Everybody walked out of there like you just ran over their dog. And I finished up with this test, and like any good 23-year-old, I was like, okay, it's Friday. Like, it's time to celebrate. Heartbroken and $5 in my pocket, I took my 21 speed bike and I rode my happy behind to Walmart. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I was like, you know what? Today we're really going to splurge. Today we celebrate. So I went to the clearance aisle. I got dark chocolate from Easter, which is about 4 months ago. And then I went to the wine department. I got a bottle of wine for about $3. It's called Three Wishes. Just delightful. Really, really great after.
Wasn't it a
Oaky
box,
birth.
at least?
Oh, it's absolutely not in a box. It was in glass. It's just quite a unique experience. So I'm all living on my high horse. I'm going to go back home. I'm going to eat my chocolate. I'm going to drink my wine. I'm going to lay on the floor. I'm going to watch Friends and finally understand why Friends makes so much sense to people in their 20s. Probably have a good cry, be in bed by maybe 10 o'clock, right? It's going to be a good day. And the universe goes, wait on, hold on here, buddy. I think we got a different plan for you. So I'm riding my bike home, less than a mile from home. I'm going down a hill, and I'm going about 35 miles an hour, which is pretty quick on a bike. But I was bombing down this hill, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this black SUV, and the black SUV blows the stop sign, and just like we like kind of hit each other, and I go into the ditch. They didn't stop, and by the time I woke up, it had been I don't know, an hour or something like that, and I was laying there kind of like concussed. I had a helmet on, thank God. And I was like in such a daze that I ended up like meandering my way back home. And I walk in, my brother, who's also a physician, goes like, what the heck happened to you? Oh my gosh. Like, are you okay? Looks like you got hit by a car. And I just went, yep. Because I did get hit by a car. So my brother checks me over. We ended up going to the hospital, internal lacerations, bucket handle fracture in my pelvis. Like the body was like pretty freaking trapped. I got hit by a car. So I talked to the doctors, talked to the urologist, talked to everybody, and they're like, hey, probably bed rest somewhere between like 6 and 9 months. Now, I've been a collegiate athlete my entire life. I cannot sit still. It does not work super well for me. So the first week of sitting in bed rest, it was like awful. Like my brother was having to like carry me to like bathe me, which is like embarrassing at an entirely different level. Like changing like a catheter bag, like all of these things. I was just like, oh my gosh, like I felt so like, I don't even know. There's no words for that. But what really started to come through for me was like this state of depression, because like I couldn't do anything. I felt like such a victim of like this experience. And I was like, what the heck? Like, I don't understand. Like, what did I do to deserve this? And the thoughts started to come in, and the thoughts were inspiring these feelings. But that wasn't the end of it. So 2 weeks into this journey, I'm still on bed rest, haven't really got out of bed yet. And I'm watching classmates continue with their lectures, and we're on 10-week intervals. So like 2 weeks out of school might as well be a lifetime. Like I'd thrown away $10,000 at that point. And I get a call from like a family friend, and I haven't talked to this gentleman in a while. And he calls me, goes, Chris, are you still at your apartment at blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, yeah, what's up? He's like, I'm coming to your house right now. Call your brother, make sure that he's home. And this dude hangs up on me. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I like call my brother, and I finally get him on the phone. I'm like, hey, just for that, like Steve called. And he's like, Steve. And I'm like, yeah, he said he's coming to the apartment. Can you like get home? Like he doesn't sound super well. So the dude flies back. I hear my brother's truck pull up, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get out of bed. So like shakily get myself up, because I haven't stood up in 10 days. And I'm standing in the door frame, and I hear my brother come up the stairs to our like little shitty apartment. And oh, there it was, to our apartment. And I see him open the door, and he's sobbing. He's crying. He's my older brother. And I've never seen him cry before. I've never seen him sob. And the other gentleman, who's like a family friend, is like holding him up. I didn't really know what was going on. And he sees me out of bed and he just looks at me with like tears streaming down his face, and he runs over to me and he holds me kind of like you would hold a child. And he knows that I'm like fragile, but he's like he's got me type of thing. And he holds my face and he looks at me with like tears streaming down his face, and he said, "Dad's gone." And what we found out was our dad, who had moved down to Atlanta to build movie sets and all of these other things, had been suffering with bipolar disorder that we didn't know about. And he had committed suicide. And we had no idea. Like I had seen him not 3 weeks ago. I was at a barbecue at his house, like all of these different things. I couldn't believe it. To lose somebody like that, they don't teach you how to process grief or any emotion for that matter, but to have something like that, it started to create this like spiral, like the depression turned into anxiety. And I didn't know. I thought it was my fault. How am I the doctor that doesn't see something like that? All of these different things. And the time kept going on. And, you don't get better. You get neutral, or you get numb is kind of how I started to recognize it. And that's what it was. I just started to get numb. So 3 weeks had kind of passed by. And the moment that I found out that my dad had committed suicide, I went to the hospital. I'm like, take all the equipment off me. I don't care. I need to move I signed a stack of waivers that were thick as a Bible. And I walked out of there in tremendous pain. So over the next 3 months, I just kind of got used to the pain and anything else, but universe wasn't done yet. So 3 months later, I get a call from a woman that I had been dating at the time. She calls me and says, "Hey, like, we got to talk." And I'm just like, "Okay, like, what's up?" And she comes over and she like looks at me and she says, "Hey, you're going to be a dad." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm going to be a dad? Like, the doctors told me that was impossible. Like, we were being careful, like all these different things." And I just sat there in disbelief. I was like, what? Like, it's just too much. This is too much. So much at 20, like, it's just so much. So the day after that, the school calls me, and good meaning accountant there says, "Hey, we got your final total for student loans. It's going to be about $200,000. Hope you have a great day, Dr. Chris. Talk to you later." And I was like,
Universal sense of humor, huh?
yeah, my gosh, like, universe, who hurt you? Like, why getting just thwomped on? So this depression, anxiety just kept going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I had no system of regulation. I had tried therapy. I tried to understand. I tried all of these different things and they didn't work. And that was when I really started to find neuroscience. And neuroscience made sense to me, because if this part of my brain is off, the mind flows through the brain, and I just can't get my mind to flow through an area that is closed. And the area that's closed is the one that's optimistic. It's the one that's happy. And my experiences has shaped me to see that bad things happen to me. So it's constantly in this like mental flinch. Like, I was constantly just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. But I was on a ticking time clock now. I was going to be a physical dad in 9 months. So I was like, great, like I start to get this together. So I started reading book after book after book after book, because the mentor of mine had told me, knowledge is power. And right now I bet you feel powerless. And I was like, that is correct, sir. So I started reading book after book, and I got better at reading and faster at reading and speed reading. And I couldn't sleep anyway, so might as well stay up and read books. And I kept going to the Goodwill, which the Goodwill in Atlanta is so good. So I kept getting these personal development books, and I was consuming them. And after 3 months, I'd consumed almost 300 books, trying to just better my life. Like, every day I was eating books, breakfast, lunch, like just consuming. And at the end of that 3 months, I was no better than I was before. And I call my mentor and I'm like, "You're a real piece of work, dude. I've consumed every bit of literature on personal development." He said, yeah. It's because knowledge is potential power. It's how you use it that makes you powerful. And he hung up on me again. I'm like, "You are a lot of words that I cannot choose not to say right now," but he was completely right. So once I started to have that realization, I understood that the psychology of this just wasn't going to be my perspective. The mindset wasn't going to be my perspective, because the mind is flowing through the brain. flowing through the brain. And the areas that I want my mind to flow down were closed down. And I want to get them reestablished. I want to get them back up. Things like the frontal cortex, the anterior cingulate gyrus. I want to down regulate my amygdala so I don't have this fight or flight response all the time. So started getting a lot into polyvagal theory, biofeedback, neurofeedback. I was wearing an EEG for almost 2 weeks straight to try to understand all these different triggers in my life. And if you start to fast forward piece by piece, what I started to do is get 1% better every single day. I started to understand that the things that my body needed to start to physically heal were the same things that my nervous system needed to reboot my brain, essentially, to get back online. So if you fast forward 6 months from that period of time, now I'm a dad and I'm so much better than I was before. Yes, there's still some anxiety. Yes, there's still some depression. Yes, I'm still mad as heck at my dad for those things, but I'm getting better and I'm getting better. And my physical body is starting to come back. I was sticking bones and I was gray behind the eyes and all of that, like nobody was home type of thing. And I started to get better and better. And people started asking me, I constantly walk around the school with headphones on and I'm reading books and digesting articles. And somebody asked me, how did you go from like kind of like a BC student to like a 4-point student? And it seems like you're studying way less. And I said, well, first I learned how to study for myself, right? The ability for me to consume information is not how the school system taught me. I knew that I needed to like draw stick figures and make pictures. Those were my notes versus like writing things down. That's just how I learned complex information. That's more of how the brain works. 40% of the brain is the occipital lobe. So let me go use that 40% to help inspire long-term hippocampal growth, which we call long-term learning. So I started to understand these pieces. But more so, I started to understand that I wanted to be emotionally available for my daughter. And the day that my daughter was born, her name is Phoenix. And every time I get to say her name, she's 3.5 going on 4 right now. Every time I say her name, it's a reminder that life lives in cycles, lives in seasons. There's rebirth and there's growth and there's death and all of these different things. And that I get to choose my sovereignty, my focus, my attention, my habits, and the people in my life help redirect that flow of information. And that I can help use neuroscience to help heal my life. And that information and the story also started to inspire other people to use neuroscience and biofeedback to help change their lives as well, to go towards high performance. So nowadays, I hardly run a physical practice here. Most of what I do is online and with local businesses here. I get to be a full-time single dad now with my extraordinary daughter. We just got back from the farmer's market and playing around down there. We get to surf, we get to paddleboard. I have the dream house I have here. Like all these pieces fell together because I learned how to love myself. I learned how to find my worth. I learned how to accept all the versions of myself that people told me were bad. And I embraced them and I made that change. And it brought me to where I am today, that even though some people might say that I'm not whole and complete, that's not their job to see me. It's my job to see me. And I've encompassed that. And I like to say now that I am as emotionally available as I possibly can in this exact moment for myself. And that's how my daughter recognizes people as well.
Well, that is one heck of a story. My goodness. And the irony and the beauty of naming your daughter Phoenix is just is a beautiful, beautiful thing. For somebody who is not a physician and is not coming from this, academic background, but has been through some form of trauma or some kind of heavy experience, how do they recalibrate? What are some simple steps that we could perhaps offer and share with our audience? Ways that they could start to recalibrate and embrace, a path similar to yours in that respect?
Yeah, so let's understand what happens when we're faced with trauma first. So if we have too much of a sensory experience, which includes emotions, the brain goes into stress. And essentially what stress does to the brain is it turns off the frontal cortex and it turns off the temporal parietal junction, which is where creativity thinking occurs. And we drop our brainwave from beta, or we drop it from like theta alpha. And the theta alpha is kind of like this like regulation state, right? It's kind of like where we get to make sense of life. It's where we want to be a good part of the day. And what it does is it drives us into high beta. And this high beta brainwave turns on specific parts of the brain. Very specifically, it turns on an area of the brainstem that we very collectively call the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system does exactly what it sounds like. It does things automatically. It does your thinking for you, does your feeling for you, does your behavior for you. And on a daily basis, it runs the reason, your heart rate and you're diffusing oxygen, and it controls the 70 trillion cells that we call the body, because I'm sure as heck not consciously doing that. But when we get overwhelmed, what we do is we don't just like compartmentalize and then those experiences dissolve, right? The emotion, the poor relationship, the bad breakups, grief, death, loss, all of those things. When it's too much for our system to process, we store those memories deep into the body. This is what we kind of call the emotional body. And for anybody that's wondering like why the heck we do that, it's because emotions are the value, that's the exchange, that's the currency of life, right? And to give those up, we are giving away a tremendous amount of evolutionary value. So the reason that the body holds on to them is your deepest lessons. Did they come from a book or did they come from life lessons, right? The ability to reflect and make sense of that. And over generations and millennia, the system has developed a way to keep track of those and log them. So life presents you with a task, and it's your ability to understand and extract the lesson and then pass that on to the next generation, right? That's kind of like what we've done, the monkey crack walnut with stick, oh, pass the stick along type of thing. And then as we got better and better and became a society, our psychology took over the place for tools, and now we can share life lessons, right? We created language. So for people that have trauma, there's like 3 sets of regulation skills that I want to talk about. There's long-term ones, which kind of gets into polyvagal theory. There's medium term, and then it's like, oh my gosh, the house is on fire. Can somebody help me put this thing out, like in the moment? So the ones that are long-term are most likely the ones that a lot of people around mindset talk about. It's kind of more of like a neurolinguistic programming type of thing where you're doing some of the affirmations, and it's a slow drip. They're things to help remind you the direction that you want to go. And those are really lovely. The things that work really well for me and for any of my intellects out there, I need to make sense of things in order to allow me to feel them, right? I have a very strong mental barrier from a lot of, challenges in my own life, whether that's, trust or abandonment or some of my like core wounds that I was gifted with, right? So in order for me to feel something, I need to understand it. And I understand things a lot through reflection practices, through journaling, through writing, through typing, through communication. One of the best ones for long-term for me, and some of the ones that we have a ton of research around, is mindfulness. Now, I didn't say meditation, I said mindfulness, because the way that you mindfully move or mindlessly move is going to give you a different interpretation long-term of self-regulation. So when you go into meditation, the first time you're going to feel this humongous sense of agitation. Agitation is a really good indication that you're in neuroplastic environment. That agitation is you butting up old pathways against a new behavior, and the system's trying to decide if that new behavior is trying to kill it. So whenever you feel agitated or frustrated, just know that that's an opportunity for plasticity and that you can rewrite that pathway in the direction that you so want. That's a really great long-term one. My favorite mindfulness activities are going for a walk around the pond. I go for a swim in the ocean because I live on an island. I go paddleboarding, surfing with my daughter. It's these things that kind of allow me to do something that gets me into a sense of being. And those are really lovely. Medium term, things that are my favorite are the research coming around like social co-regulation, right? And this is like having a conversation like you and I are having. When you get into a collective experience and you're able to share language, written, audio, body language, whatever that is, you begin to co-regulate, right? Typically, the way the system is set up is in a hierarchy. So we're always looking for that which is most regulated, that which is most coherent. And there's plenty of research out there around like leadership evolves from people that are most regulated. Like crap is hitting the ceiling. The people that kind of stay calm are the ones that people mirror body language from. So when the conversation is open and expressive, you're able to kind of share the experience, and people, if they've done some work on themselves, will help feed you back what they see. So in those types of scenarios like therapy, coaching, good friend groups, right, which are sometimes challenging to find, people that can just hold space for you, all of those things create this like medium term, like 1 to 2 day kind of in the long-term week to help you process and understand differently. Now, the ones that are most valuable, I think, come in more so like the short term. What do you do when like stuff is really hitting the ceiling and you don't have somebody there? You just need some of these quick changes. So we used to think that polyvagal theory, which talks about the vagus nerve, which is this wandering cranial nerve that is a branch of the autonomic nervous system, was the thing that allows us to regulate, which is that calming down sensation. And really the sense regulation is just getting back to a functional state of homeostasis. And this is a common misconception I think a lot of neuroscience aficionados will probably agree with me with, is that that sense of regulation might need stress, right? For example, somebody that has depression, they might need a positive stressor like working out or going for a run, or, I have a rebounder behind me, or lifting weights, or some of those things to get them into a mobile state. They need that stress because depression is quite literally this lack of expression. The areas aren't turned on because they don't have enough influence. Versus somebody that has anxiety, putting them into a state of meditation is also going to stress out the system. This is my type A overachiever, ADHD. If I try to sit you down in a chair and talk about your feelings, you're going to lose your bananas because that's not how you process. So understanding what those tools are for you. Some of my favorite ones, like I've talked about in the moment, if you need to go through it, are some of these like quick self-regulation tools, which are actually coming from the post-sympathetic ganglion, which are a part of your nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. All of this is a bunch of fancy words to say, here's some really cool tools that'll help you. So one of my favorites is simply looking up, right? If you've ever gone into hypnotherapy and things like that with a licensed hypnotherapist, they'll kind of put you in this state of relaxation, walk you through a meditation, and then they'll have you close your eyes and they'll have you look up. The stretching and coordination of the eye muscles are actually a part of occipital motor cranial nerves that directly connect to the brain. Looking up will actually cause a heightened state of arousal, and it'll also help you regulate and kind of plane back out. So if you're at a conversation, things are getting heated, simply like looking up at the ceiling for a period of time. Or if you ever have somebody and you're like, oh, do you remember what Susie's last name is? And they kind of look up and to the right. What they're doing is trying to shorten and excite the pathways that have to go to memory, right? We do some of these things innately. The other ones that I got from my favorite neuroanatomist, his name is Andrew Huberman. He runs Huberman Labs at Stanford. Amazing human being. This double inhale, which if you guys can hear me, I'll try to do it really hard into the mic, but you breathe in through your nose twice. So deep inhale in, and you do an additional inhale, kind of snorted there. You guys can enjoy that, take it to the bank. But that double inhale tends to have this regulation, relaxation state. Even one breath of that is really, really functional in the moment. And you don't have to do it as exaggerated as I did, where I'm like eating this microphone. You can do it very quietly. When I work with lawyers and things like that are in these very intense situations and they recognize arousal, they will do these behaviors and it'll kind of bring them back down to stance, right? These are in the moment triggers. The other one that's really good, if you can take a little bit of a break, you're yelling with the spouse, why didn't you do the dishes? Because you didn't take the trash out. Your grandma's a bad person. Your mom's a two-bit hoe. And you guys start going back and forth. You go, hold on, wait a second. I'm just going to go outside for a minute. And what you can do is create this sense of gaze, right? So relaxing the eyes to not super focus, because when we get focused, we tend to pinpoint on something, right? Imagine that a tiger is chasing a gazelle and the gazelle is simply narrow laser focused on how to get the heck out of there. That is their objective. We do the same thing as adults, right? So we kind of broaden our horizons and kind of go out into a visual gaze. And then what you can do is kind of put your finger in front of you and look at your finger close up, and then close your eyes and let your eyes relax, and then go back to a gaze, like kind of looking at the horizon. This is why sunsets and sunrises and looking at the ocean is so relaxing. You're getting the combination of negative ions from the ocean splashing and all of those other goodies as well. So all of these tools and triggers start to play back in together. And also learning the capacity of your physical body is extraordinarily important too. So the other half of what I do is a lot around biohacking and understanding the nutrition and the health and the wellness of all these things too, because there is a limit. If you're not getting any sleep, you're going to max out your potential because there's only so much your system can take, right? Exhaustion, you're eating the wrong foods, they're causing an inflammation, you're putting rancid fats into your bodies. All of these different things play a specific role. And I know this is just like a huge chunk of an elephant to eat at one bite. Hopefully you guys can go back through and listen to this again. But this is a lot of what I do, is to help to teach some of these regulations so that you can have a better toolbox, so that when things come up, you have an understanding of where you want to take them.
I'm finally speechless, because this is just so much brilliant, wonderful, just incredible information. I'm learning
the Pikachu
so much
cup.
from you
It was the Pikachu cup.
in this session. We are going to talk about worthiness. That is the topic that we're excited to discuss today. It is something that our community struggles with particularly. I want to share just a really quick story of my own. I'm an artist before I'm anything else, and I, over the years, of course, received like so much critique, uninvited critique. And I had something very recently, and it was during a time when I had probably 9 out of 10 on the success level. I was doing really well. I had a show, I had all these great things going on. everything was awesome. But I get this one email from a complete stranger that tells me my work is terrible. In fact, I will use her quote. She said, "Your work is nothing but cheap framed platitudes. You know nothing about art, dearie," end quote. Very angry, very angry. But what did I do? I forgot all these good things that were going on. And I focused so much on this negative person that my wife even said to me, she's like, stop. You need to stop. Yeah. Why is it as human beings that we have this focus on the negative, this, this leaning towards the negative, kind of a bias towards that negativity, as opposed to all these wonderful things that could be going on around us? And how do we counter that?
Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. So there's going to be 2 points. Thank you for being vulnerable to share as well. I know sometimes that's not the easiest. Where do some of these things come from is kind of like the questions that I start to ask myself. So if we go to psychology for a moment, there's something called attachment theory that essentially says from the ages of 0 until we're about 13 years old, the way that children perceive their reality is based on the relationships of their peers that they observe. The way adults treat each other, the way adults treat children, the way adults treat you, that is how reality kind of is. And a lot of the time we come from this generation of the industry, like the age of industry, right? Where I need you to get good grades to determine your success. I need you to go to school. I need you to go do all of these different things. And your value is not based upon your effort. It's based on the accomplishments that you get. That was the age of industry, right? I need you to go do those things. And those societal belief systems kind of get teetered down to how our parents raised us, right? Because they understood how to parent from their parents, which, 2 generations ago, we were in the Great Depression. So we built these scarcity mindsets, and we can learn that one of those things that we tend to do is, and that our parents were really great at creating perfectionists. So I'm 28 years old, and the generation from millennials and the generation before are like these group of like type A overachieving perfectionists. We are awesome at anxiety, just crushing it. So good. And I think a lot of the reason that we did that is because our parents never praised us for effort. They always praised us for accomplishment. That was how we received love as children, right? It's like, you got that A, like, I don't know about you, but like my C's never got put on like the fridge, right? So I was always expecting and anticipating more. And that reaction is called fawn. So when the system gets put into stress, we have fight, freeze, and fawn. And the fawn response is this people-pleasing response, right? That if I don't receive that emotional connection, I am not going to get the love. So we constantly create these perfectionists that are always trying to focus on better, focus on more. And a lot of that can come all the way from like how we learn to receive love, which from 0 to 13, you're in grade school, a huge chunk of that time. Great, like you're receiving love based on the A's you get, or how well you perform at sports and things like that. So I think a portion of it can come from this fawn response that we develop, especially if you have quite a creative community. I imagine most of them were like stellar in art and musician class and in all of these different things that we as a society at that time, we never valued that. Where now that is the lifeblood, like that defines our communities, our ability to express art, like it's emotion and movement, like it's things that we necessarily need, especially for our generation. So I think that's part of it. The other one really has to come down to the negativity bias that is quite literally built into our nervous system, that if you made a mistake on the Sahara and you heard a little rustle in the bushes and then you ignored it, and that little rustle in the bushes ended up being a tiger, end of genetic line, right? Done. So we are primed to focus on the negative in a state of survival. This is also the reason that public speaking is the #1 fear in the world, because if you say something silly or you don't take that critique and do something functional with it, and they come back and like kick you out of the tribe, we still have a tribe mentality as a human species. So if I say something silly, or I don't do something about that critique, or if I don't just constantly think about it and I say something and they kick me out of the tribe, I'm dead, right? So we have this ancient evolutionary pathway that has us focus on the negative thoughts of others, especially the critiques, to hopefully improve the species as a collective, but that's no longer true. Right? Like I can be totally solo over here living my best life and I'll still pick up those negativities. So the best way to kind of like create those barriers for me, hurt people, right? Plain and simple, like the projections. I made a post today, like the judgments I place on you are the wounds I'm not willing to heal inside of me, right? So that's a fun little one that we always get to play with. And if you're going to be an artist, I imagine not an artist. Mm-mm. However, you need to give yourself the certainty and predictability that there's going to be somebody that critiques your work, right? Like all of the great artists of our generation typically start off and they were just getting like thrashed, right? And then they made improvements. But if you really look at them and you connect with some of these phenomenal artists, they're hilarious. They're great. They never take anything personally. So reading the Four Agreements, which is a really great book, highly recommend it. Rule 2, take nothing personally, right? You have the option. You can take that and think that it's bad and that the world is on fire. Thank you for that critique, dearie, and live your life through that. And you can focus and focus and focus outside of your control what they say about you. The work that you created is done and over with, and you create a boundary there of the things you can and cannot control. That list of the things you control is very small. It is you. It is your response or your reaction to it. So somebody says, to me, the work that you do is hurting people. It's awful. I don't know why you're going to do that. You should go jump off a very tall bridge. I say, oh my gosh, thank you so much for that reflection. I really appreciate that. That doesn't determine my worth. And I imagine that you're typically a hurt person or things like that. It takes a lot of work to get to that point, but that state of resilience is really inside of you. And it's saying over and over again through these regulated states, like, the best example I can give is you get into a fight with your spouse. You are both going back and forth saying all these things. 2 months later, did that fight matter? Or were you just like, I am so sorry. Like I said stupid stuff. I said things that I didn't mean and all of that, right? In the long term, is it going to make a difference? Like I constantly ask myself that question, like, is the critique of this single nobody out in the middle of like Ireland actually going to do it? No, I don't give two hoots what like Susie Q75 big baller 42 at Gmail said. I don't give a flaming shit, right? Like, however, the critiques of my family, I want to take it in. So finding people or community that can support you in a positive way, long-term relationship advice from the research says that there is a 7-to-1 ratio, for every 7 things that you say, 4 of them should be positive, right? The ratio is skewed in that way. It's the golden ratio, I think, if you look it up in relationships. So this includes friendships, this includes other things. So having a community that supports you, so you can say Susie 55 big baller at Gmail said mean things and called me dearie, and then express that to somebody, they'll help you co-regulate. So you don't have to do this alone. If you can get a good community, a good spouse, and say, this person was a big meanie and I want to go run them over with a freight train, they'll go, hold on there, sweetie, probably not a functional, what about that? Like, what did that make you feel, right? Like, and do they have any merit? Like, does Susie Q big baller 45 at Gmail actually going to make an impact on your life? No, it doesn't matter at all. And inside of doing that, my favorite one, you write some letters. Dear Susie Q, big baller 45. I think the things that you said were very mean. I want to run you over with a semi. However, my wife said that that's probably not really a functional tool. I understand that today might've been a bad day. Somebody might've cut you off in traffic, and you start rationalizing why they were aggressive towards you and mean to you. And then you go light that thing on fire and you call it a day and you get on with your life.
Wow. Amen to that.
Anyways.
So this is, you're talking about, it takes a long time to get to that point. I can look back 10 years ago and, being a business owner and being an artist, and 10 years ago, I would get something like that landing in my inbox and I would go to ground for 3-4 days. I was done. It totally just destroyed me. Today, I'm able to somewhat put it in a box and, have those conversations around, yes, this is about them. It's not about me. But of course, that fight or flight, that fawning desire is still there. It still triggers something. Yeah. What are some other methods of perhaps emotional intelligence or neuroscience-based theories that folks can use to really just affirm their worthiness as a creative person?
Yeah, definitely. So I think worthiness is a state of remembrance. I've never looked at my daughter and gone like, boy, I bet you don't think that you're worthy. She knows her worth. She knows who she is. And we have all been children at some time. We've all known that we are just like this pure, infinite love that it just gets muddied up. Like humanity is really good at that. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop her from forgetting her worth. right? I don't know if I can do that. She's going to go to school. Girls are going to be mean to her, right? Somebody might say that her name is, I don't know, right? And I don't know if I actually would try to stop that for her, because when she becomes an adult and she's able to reflect and she's able to go through and look at all of those things, those are the life lessons that help carve, Michelangelo, carve David out of the stone, right? Those are the things, the chisel, the hammer strokes that break through for those things. So I don't know if there is truly a state of that, but constantly peeling back the layers, all the defenses that you put up through elementary, middle school, through adult, through that first job, through that first divorce, through that awful relationship, through the abuse, through the trauma, through all of that, it can define you or it can help shape you. And those are choices at the end of the day of like what that really looks like. Neuroscience based, I think you as a brain can create the environment to make sense of things more quickly. I think mindset is kind of like the super broad category that we attempt to use to kind of like one size fits all. In my perspective, I think there's probably a more functional way, which is learning some of these tools and then giving them a try, right? So like something bad happened today. How are you going to regulate and help make sense of it? And understand it's also not going to happen today, right? Like the brain is a prediction machine. It's going to attempt to constantly make sense of the uncertain. It needs certainty. The brain's job is to take in information, compare it to the past and all the traumas, all the emotions, and try to predict the future. And it's really good at that, right? And it'll start to do that automatically. But the self-awareness that you bring to the conversation and say, hold on, that person that cut me off in traffic today, or Susie Q that dropped you that email, that brought something up inside of me. What is that? Because all of the agitation, all of the anger, everything that you feel and express, you have the ability to either project that back onto the person or meet that fire with compassion and just say, thank you for your feedback type of thing. And see, does that actually land with you? A lot of these skills that to get you to that functional space is about regulation, right? To actually be able to say that that person that just destroyed your work, right? Like, I can't believe you did this, or I can't believe you did that. Like, I have like messes of articles that have like such bad sentences in them. Like, I don't know how I wrote them. Like, I don't know why people call me doctor sometimes. And people critique it like crazy. And I go, oh, I feel a little bit stupid right now. And what a great opportunity for me to like go get an editor or something like that, or somebody to like read through my social media post before I go blow it up and stuff like that. But the reason I'm able to have those thoughts is because the mind flows through the brain, and I need those areas turned back on. And regulation and understanding tools for me are what really makes a difference. And I tend to measure my biometrics every day to see how available I am to do the work. Some of my favorite tools are the BioStrap or an Aura Ring or Inner Balance from HeartMath. Those are really great tools to help you like build regulation for me, because it's hard for me. It was hard for me to like feel what regulation felt like. It's etheric. It's my nervous system, right? But these tools help you measure and recognize and connect to what regulation feels like. So if I have a really hard day, like being a single dad can sometimes just be hard, right? Like I won't deny being a parent, period, like period, point blank, it's hard work. But if at the end of the day, like she just had a lot of these emotions, I need to regulate myself because my system is a meaning making machine. It'll say this happened because of this, or this will happen because of that. And if you don't control it over time, it becomes schizophrenia. And we call that magic thinking, which takes a lot. Like nobody's going to be schizophrenic out there, but it takes a lot of that to do it because the brain's constantly trying to make sense of it. But that's the autonomic nervous system doing your thinking for you. Regulate yourself back to a state of function, back to a state of utility where you're not the victim of your circumstances, where you get to be the director, not just a character of the movie of your life. And inside of those states, take more functional action, whether that's understanding that the thing you need today is Game of Thrones binge watching and a gallon of ice cream. You need to know yourself and say, tomorrow I'm going to feel better, or getting some sleep, or understanding. It's truly about knowing yourself and the tools that help you get to that state of relaxation. Some people need to go smoke a cigarette out on the bench out there. Now, I don't recommend smoking, and there's probably healthy alternatives, but like knowing yourself is a really important thing when it comes down to regulation, and then using that regulated state to like really build up who you truly are.
There's a lot of pressure right now on creatives, business owners, entrepreneurs to be extremely active online, social media, blogging, video, live, podcast, blah, 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 all the things that we're doing right now. With that comes a heightened level of anxiety, but also some physiological impacts from being on these devices. in addition to that, you talked, I did a little my research and I've been following you for a while, but also the impacts of not having a positive sleep routine. Can you just talk a little to those two top subjects, to technology and sleep, and why they're so important?
Yeah, so I'm really blessed to have worked with a few like creatives, whether they're writers or like a painter is one that's coming up to mind. Um, and they tend to believe that the inspiration is going to come at 2 a.m. and that's where they write their best stories. When realistically, the game that I try to play with them is just trying to understand that's probably not as true as you think it is, right? So instead of like completely burning ourselves out to an absolute crisp, let's start to like learn some like adult health things, right? So like what does proper sleep look like to you? Because just because you're sleeping doesn't mean you're recovering. So if you take your phone to bed with you, from the last second you look at your phone without like blue blockers on, your body is producing small drips of cortisol because the blue light from our devices mirrors solar noon in the sky. And at midday solar noon, which is pretty close to out here in South Carolina right now, you are getting drips of cortisol to create arousal, right? To get things done throughout the day. If I'm looking at that at 2 a.m., I'm trying to convince my mind that it is the middle of the day. So like understanding your cycles is really important. Now I understand some of us are going to be creatives, but you can get small devices that are red lights or blue light blockers that I highly, highly recommend getting. All of these small things make tweaks, but great. Let's talk about like simple things like routine, right? The brain needs like routine, just like children need routine. We're just big adult children, right? That really need our routines. So I talk about 3 non-negotiables that you do every single day that'll help move the needle for you, right? Things that are actually going to like progress you and move you further on. What are the things that inspire you? When do you feel most inspired to paint, to draw, to create, to produce, to write, whatever that is? You have an index of the days that you felt most creative and the foods you ate or the amount of sleep that you had. All of these things, you can quite literally build out a blueprint for like, great, I need tomorrow to be a creative day. Amazing. Today, I'm going to have a glass of red wine. I'm going to go to bed at 7 p.m. after I watch a sci-fi movie. And I'm going to wake up tomorrow at 4 a.m., drink a pot of coffee, and I'm going to sit down at my computer. And I know for me, that's going to create this amazing state of creativity. I'm going to set myself into bed at night, asking my brain to like find a story or something that I can create or research that comes up to me. And my brain, being very smart, will work through the night. It'll dream about these things because I've set it a focus. I've given it a task to do. So the 3 non-negotiables are really, really important. They help build an index or a direction for you to flow the mind through the brain. My 3 non-negotiables: education. I love learning. I'm a lifelong learner. It's something that like I get excited, right? I've read this week, it's Thursday. I think I've read 7 books this week, right? Just like I just love it. I've read like today I read 14 articles of like publications. Like I'm just a nerd about that because I never liked school ever, period, until I started to find like the brain, personal development. Now I really like it. The second thing is,
just to interject real quick on that, because I think this is a great takeaway for our audience. I loved your the method of how you retain information from reading, that you have a notepad that you take notes after everything you read. I'm sorry if I totally just
no.
The next section of what you were going to share.
No, this is totally fine. So my other 2 non-negotiables, I'll just talk about them. One is going to be some kind of mindfulness activity, whether that's journal, meditation, walking for me. And then the last one's going to be movement for my body. But you brought up a really fascinating point. So a couple of days ago, I posted how to read a book as an adult because nobody really told me. So you kind of find the amount of free time that you have throughout your day, and you dedicate a percentage of that to education, whether that's reading, whether that's listening. For me, I like reading books. But the average person retains 2 to 3 bits of information, functional bits of information from a book. That's insane, right? So what I do is before I read a book, I'll go through and all the chapters at the very end of them have a sticky note on them. And what I'll do is I'll write a little line of the thing that I learned. So I'll read a chapter and then I'll write a line and then I'll put the date. Here's the thing that I learned. And some books have like 6 or 7 sticky notes because I've read them so many times, but can always go through and say, oh my gosh, look, 3 years ago, this is what I was like taking from that. But it builds you up. Like if a book has 20 chapters in it, and you now have 20 bits of information to reference condensed into a single line that is like functional for your life. So that's a really like functional approach. Like I try to make really practical tools for myself, and then I just tend to share them because there's some crazy people out there that think things I share are interesting.
Guilty. Well, Dr. Chris, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and just giving such fruitful and valuable information to our community. You do have a membership program. You do have additional resources where people can learn more from you. We are going to have a special link that's available in the show notes just for you, for our listeners. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So I run a community called Wired for Worthy, which is really centered around everything that we talked about. So like this week, we talked about the biology of belief, which is a really great book. And we also talked about the placebo effect, but how do you like rewrite those belief systems? So every week we have a conversation on Thursdays at 11:15 a.m. That time might be different from where it is, but right now it has no direction of change. But I mean, there's tons and tons and tons of content in there. It's a really awesome community. It's on its own application and it's only $97 a month to get inside of there. I tried to make it as functional as humanly possible. Talk about biohacking. We talk about habits. We talk about routines. We're vulnerable. We're straightforward. It's a really, really awesome group of human beings. I'm really honored to help facilitate them.
Fantastic. All right, folks. Well, you heard it here first from Dr. Chris. Do go follow Dr. Chris on YouTube as well. He has some phenomenal content. If you want to just let folks know where they can do that.
Yeah, so I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, kind of. Most of my stuff's on Instagram right now. And the link to that is just at Dr. Chrisley, DrChrislee. And come take a drip and listen. I'm the only one that runs that account. So if you drop me a message, hey, I heard you on this podcast, I'll be sure to reach out to you, say hi. You're probably going to get a video of me and my daughter playing with unicorn stuffed animals in the background. But I always do my best to reach out to people that reach out. So please come say hi.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been the Smart Art Business Podcast. Delighted to be with you today. And we will be back again next week with another episode. Thanks so much, folks.